everyone to the Ben Wiersma Show. I'm excited for the show today. I've got with me Chef Scott Eiserhoff. Chef, where are we at?
So we're at the Jack Art House here just off 97th Street and 11th Ave, and it's beautiful. It's all indigenous. It's an indigenous art house. Yeah, it's just beautiful, right?
Beautiful. And so we have this indigenous art gallery, and then connected to it we have
Sysco.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about I want to dive into a bit about yourself to start off with. So how did you get into being a chef, and maybe just that story?
That's a long story, but I'll keep it short. So growing up as a kid, I was surrounded by food all the time. Mm-hmm. My earliest memories are of just watching my kuklum, my grandmother and my mushroom cooking bannock over the fire and smoking geese.
Oh, wow.
So out on the line. So that's a pretty vivid memory of mine. Mm-hmm. And moving forward, like going through school, high school, you really teachers ingrain into you what do you want to do when you grow up?
Right.
I had no clue at the time. So I was watching David Wolfman. He's an indigenous chef. He was like the only indigenous chef that had that type of platform back then, right? Mm-hmm. So my mom asked me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I don't know, I'll be a chef. Yeah. Applied to culinary school, got in, went there. I did not like it, dropped out, studied business. But also, the reasons why I dropped out was because there was no indigenous perspective on food. It was all French-based techniques and French teachings, not French. And there was nothing that I grew up with. So I couldn't relate to it, right? So I dropped out, studied business in Toronto, and worked in the industry and just really learned hands-on. And I think that paid off.
And that's a really important understanding. You want to cook with your heritage, right?
Yes.
And so not seeing that representation, it kind of I don't want to say it bothered you, but it obviously resonated with you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating story, Chef. So, on that kind of topic, I'm always interested to find what inspires chefs.
Yeah.
So kind of what inspires you and your food?
What inspires me? My food memories. Just even walking out on the land and coming across ingredients that people just walk by here,
right?
Like wild spinach,
mm-hmm.
which is lamb's quarters, which you can see. It grows in my yard.
Yeah.
Seeing Saskatoon berries, and just walking through the markets, mm-hmm. and just really remembering the food that I grew up with and how I can inject my perspective of food into what the bistro does, but also at the same time telling these stories, mm-hmm. but also telling the political side of indigenous food and our stories, like the history that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah.
Like colonization has really devastated us as a people, but we're still here and we're practicing our traditions today, and through our food, I think that really helps me reconnect to my culture. Mm-hmm. With that, when I'm cooking, all these memories come back to me, and with that my language, I'll say I'll say a word that I haven't spoken in 15, 20 years.
Right.
And I think that's really important to me. Yeah. I want to showcase indigenous food and the potential of it.
Yeah. I think it's bringing it into the light and giving it that spotlight and that weight that it deserves.
Exactly.
Right? As a cultural food of Canada.
Yeah.
Right. That's absolutely fantastic. So maybe tell me a bit about Pipis Chow. What kind of inspired you to start the cafe? Was it more just kind of
so what inspired me to do Pipis Chow was community. Mm-hmm. I was a full-time chef working at downtown Chilino. I got tired of working 13-hour days, 12-hour days, and I applied for a job at Yes, mm-hmm. as kitchen coordinator. Mm-hmm. And that's where I learned, I just started doing stews and memories that came to me to really put cultural perspective into what these youth were eating. Because a lot of indigenous youth were accessing the shelter for either it was using a computer, or like, getting help with resumes. At the same time, they could eat food, like lunch. And I think it's important that like culturally appropriate food is what the body needs in order to heal, right? But also from there, we did a pop-up at Fishbone when it was open.
Yeah.
And then from there, we just kind of blew up, and where I had to sit down and either quit my full-time job and pursue catering and events, which I did. And yeah, it was through the community actually, like reaching out to like, hey, can you cater these events? And they were all Indigenous-led organizations. And for me, I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'm not even a business yet, and people are asking me to cater their events and put my perspective of what I think Indigenous food is. And it's not what I think, it's what is Indigenous food is exactly, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, from there, just I'm very lucky the way that Pipis Show grew. I always put it as like a little example of like, a robin's egg, how it hatches. And those infant stages are very quick, right?
Yeah.
Even as babies, like there's that stage where there's just so much growth in that. That's what I compare to our business to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic representation of how quick it can happen, right? Exactly, that connection. I like that. And speaking of your time at Yes, it is about that representation. I believe that seeing individuals that have that look like you and look like that representation is so important in education, just the community. And I know one of the big goals that you have through your organization is that food and community piece, and I think that you're really making that message heard through the work that you're doing. So I just think that's absolutely fascinating. So was there anything you wanted to touch on, maybe that food and community type piece?
Sorry. I'll tell you about how the name came about.
Yeah.
So we were doing so many events, right?
Yeah.
And the organizations were just getting larger to the point where they were getting for the government of Alberta, City Hall, City of Edmonton, where they're like, you can't just write a check out to Scott.
Right.
It has to be a business entity or something.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I'll call it Pipis Show. And you got to register the name. And then, you make so much money, you have to apply for GST numbers. So that was a story in itself. It was a huge learning journey. Of course, taxes.
It's all that stuff you learn as a new business owner, right?
And then the name Pipis Show actually popped up in my head out of right away as soon as me and my wife sat down to talk about what do we name it.
Right.
I said I didn't want an English name. I wanted something that really truly honors what we do and pays respect to who I am. And Pipis Show is actually a name my mushroom gave to me as a kid, because robins back home are messengers. So when you see robins, that's like the first sign of spring, right? And that's all you hear back home is just these robins singing.
Yeah.
And for me, whenever I visit the reservation, at Wapskit, I'd spend so much time there as a kid. All my memories, all my exciting memories are being there for the summer or the winter holidays. It was a sign that Scott was here, because I always ask questions and ask why do you do it like this, and why do you smoke geese like this, and I just sat down with him and just really, I called it catching up time.
It's a beautiful story. I absolutely love that. So Chef, I always like to ask guests on the show, what are you most excited for about the industry in the future?
I talk about representation a lot.
Yeah.
And I see so many Indigenous chefs coming out and just being more there, right? In the spotlights. I think that brings me a lot of hope, because back in my day, David Wolfman was the only Indigenous chef that I knew of, right? And my grandparents, just all the cooks in my life were of my family, but they were never in the professional setting. And I think the more Indigenous representation, the more it inspires Indigenous youth and people who want to like go into the industry, the hospitality industry. I think that's really important. Edmonton is like their biggest population of Indigenous people. And I think, representation it really matters right now. And
It does matter, yeah.
highlighting Indigenous chefs and Indigenous like entrepreneurs is really important.
No, that's I agree with you. I think that there's a moment here that we're seeing, like you said, more and more representation, and more representation is needed within all industries, but there's definitely a connection to that hospitality and food industry for sure amongst Indigenous communities and Indigenous chefs. So Chef Scott, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was, it's really a blessing to hear your story and to talk about your business and everything that you're contributing to the community here. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Well, everyone, this was our show. Thank you so much for joining us. And like I always say, remember to share food and care for one another.